remember that Momo thing that was going around a few years ago? Well, this is kind of the unofficial movie of that. So this is Grimcutty, directed and written by John Ross, and stars Sara Wolfkind as Asha, kind of our main character. Now, Asha is a teenage girl who is a somewhat of an anxious type, doesn't have lots in the way of friends and stuff. She spends most of her time making those ASMR videos that no one kind of really watches and things like that, and she is a victim of kind of being a slave to her generation, so to speak. So, you know, her parents are very concerned that she's spending too much time online, as are the kind of the parents in this particular kind of neighbourhood, and they kind of want to try and get away from the addiction of the kind of the modern kind of internet and always being on your phone or your computer and whatnot. But there seems to be a physical manifestation of this kind of hysteria that's created over these kind of online challenges and things like this in the form of Grimcutty, a kind of a creature that looks a little bit like the one from Death Note that appears and harms kids, slashing them, but making us ultimately being invisible to anyone else, making it look like they have harmed themselves. And it's up to Asha to try and figure out if this thing is real or not, and maybe how to stop it. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works with Momo, Grimcutty. Okay, so I was talking the other day about a movie called Deadstream, which is kind of a film which relies heavily on kind of technology, and this is another one. So this obviously is a new frontier, I think, for horror films, and you know, it's a new avenue where you can have these kind of technology-based kind of horror films that obviously we haven't seen that much before until now, because obviously the technology is relatively new and behaviours have kind of changed. So it's really a new frontier, I think, for filmmakers to explore, you know, these avenues, which I think is a, you know, is a great idea and gives us some kind of fresh kind of storytelling. And this movie does feel like it's obviously really addressing, I think, modern kind of issues that we have, where kids these days are seen, at least for people who are in my generation, you know, I'm 48 for context, so I wasn't, you know, when I was young, we didn't have phones and things like that. Oh, boomer! Well, actually, Gen X, thank you very much. But anyway, but you know, so for someone my age, you can kind of understand from the parents' point of view, obviously, where these kind of kids are seemingly heads are buried all the time in their kind of technology, whilst obviously I think the movie does a reasonable job here of actually kind of giving you both perspectives. But I think it's a new and interesting idea here about how technology can ultimately kind of affect people, and kind of the dangers that it kind of maybe kind of purports to have and things like this. So I thought it was an interesting idea, and obviously basing it on, unofficially at least, on this kind of urban legend or this Momo that was set out a few years ago, but kind of obviously changing it for their own thing, making it this kind of Grimcutty character. Obviously you can kind of relate it to a kind of a real life kind of incident and stuff like that, and obviously we had like Slender Man and such prior to that. So I think the idea here is pretty solid, and I do think it's, you know, it shows you some of the kind of the instances where people seemingly are always kind of being on their phones, and you do see the frustrations from the parent side and from you know, Asha's side. That's the young girl who is the person doing it, and how she feels like she's kind of being unjustifiably kind of targeted by hysteria and things like that. So I thought that was all pretty good, and I actually quite liked the depiction of this family. So we have the two parents, Asha, the kind of the older teenage daughter, and the younger brother. And I have to say, I quite like them as a family. I thought they kind of had some pretty good scenes together and seemed like a pretty functional family. I think a lot of these times in these films, you know, that you have films that show a dysfunctional family and kind of, you know, there's a lot of conflict in it. And there is conflict in this family, but you do feel that they are genuinely supportive of each other, which is quite nice. And as I say, you probably see this less often than you do dysfunctional families, which I thought was kind of quite good. And it's very modern. Obviously, this speaks to you know, young audiences, I think. So this is certainly a horror, I feel that younger audiences will kind of gravitate to, because they will kind of certainly, I think, relate to the kind of the teenage kind of characters in this kind of movie. You know, it kind of hits a number of different things, you know, anxiety, online bullying, all that kind of stuff, popularity, all the kind of the teenage kind of angsty kind of stuff that you have these days and stuff like that, which I thought was kind of interesting. And, you know, I think it hits a few nails on the head there, as well as kind of having the point of view from the parents. Grimcutty itself is quite an interesting design, certainly obviously influenced, I feel, by the Momo character. And I say I was getting the I don't know what the character's called, but the thing from the Death Note, the kind of the anime series, kind of looks a little bit like that. So it does, but it does kind of look like it is a somewhat different kind of style of kind of creature. Certainly, kind of visually, kind of quite striking. On the technical side, I think the movie is proficiently made in regards to kind of production value, camera work, editing, things like that, sound design, all done to a proficient kind of standards. And then maybe does go on at a kind of a fair old pace, which I thought was quite good. Okay, so let's maybe transition to what I feel doesn't work. I feel this movie tries to almost have too many things happening at once to a certain degree. I mean, this creature is meant to be the manifestation of kind of all of the hysteria that is produced by parents, which I thought was an odd choice, not by the people that are doing it, which I thought was kind of an odd choice, because I felt like the parents were somewhat kind of overreacting, or at least it just seems that the whole town seems to be somewhat overreacting in a short amount of time. It's almost like a viral outbreak, this thing. And I just felt it was a little bit kind of too much. You kind of feel like it didn't really seem like a situation that would really happen. These parents kind of freaking out so much, so quickly, and so many of them, because this kind of affects pretty much the whole neighbourhood, which kind of felt like they just truncating it into a kind of to obviously fit into a kind of a short running time. So I think the idea is solid. I actually think the movie starts off fairly strong. But as the film progresses, I feel the kind of like the ideas are a little bit kind of shoehorned in there to a certain degree, and I don't think they all particularly work. And as the film goes on, I do feel the movie kind of gets a little convoluted, and I think the kind of the decisions that are made and the kind of the reasons why things are kind of like they are, I don't want to spoil anything, I don't know, it didn't really make too much sense to me, to be honest with you, and I thought actually on times were a little bit kind of silly, and I think they just try and have a little bit too many kind of like internet kind of themed kind of things happening, if that makes sense, in one kind of sitting. This needed to be maybe saved for a later movie to a certain degree. I have to say as well, as the film goes on, certainly into the third act, I kind of, from where I quite like this kind of family unit, I have to say some of the characters become a little bit kind of bordering on unlikable, because some of the kind of their relationships seem to kind of like go into an area where you feel like, I don't know if that's really kind of like it flows in a natural way. Again, I'm trying to be vague, so I don't want to spoil it for you. Yeah, but some of they end up becoming a little bit unlikable to a kind of certain degree. The Grimcutty character himself, I don't know if it works in like a motion picture. This is one of those things where I think if you see a still shot of it, it kind of looks quite interesting. But in a moving kind of scenario where this thing is moving around, it kind of looks like really clunky, like it's massively top heavy. You just expect it kind of to fall down, and the face isn't all that animated. So you kind of have this one expression. I mean, it changes slightly, but you more or less have this one expression for the whole time. So it kind of looks just like a model. So again, if you look at a photo of this, you look at screen grab and think, oh, that looks cool. But the actual depiction in kind of moving images, I think it loses something. It kind of looks a little bit kind of fake. And again, some of the story elements here, to me, didn't really feel like it rang quite true. And I also think it should have addressed maybe how people kind of move on pretty quickly from internet kind of like things, you know, news articles. There's a big thing, and then it kind of people move on seemingly like a week later to the next one, which to me is a large part of kind of modern culture, and certainly kind of you know, these trends or things like that. You'll see one minute, or there's outrage about something, and then a week later there's something else that's all forgotten about. And that movie, the movie doesn't really address that, which I feel is a large part of the modern kind of cycle of hysteria and kind of news and stuff like that. So overall, I think this is a good idea. I think having these kind of these modern horrors use kind of modern technology, modern kind of like trends, and certainly modern attitudes to tell kind of new stories is certainly an interesting kind of frontier for films. And I do feel there is some stuff that this movie gets right, but I do feel it ends up kind of getting in its own way to a certain degree, and that ultimately becomes a little bit convoluted and not as kind of clever as the first half. I think the second half definitely feels more kind of a generic horror film and loses some of that sort of the interesting kind of setup that it built up in that kind of first half. And you know, I don't know if the Grimcutty as a kind of a antagonist particularly works, but I will give it a 5 out of 10. It's kind of it's somewhat watchable. Certainly if you're interested in kind of like meme culture and kind of you're a younger person, you kind of maybe will relate to this more than maybe someone who's a little older. So it's a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing it.